if you live on the internet, as I do, particularly if you live on Twitter, as I do, you could be forgiven for thinking that every fandom, every convention is a hotbed of sexual abuse and racism and the most horrible behaviour imaginable. One of Caligula's great bacchanals, perhaps. And yet, when you actually go to one of these conventions, or when you participate in the community, it's something entirely different.
War, famine, death, aid. Then you look out your window, it's just...
It's just not visible, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going on, but it does make it hard to believe. But the evidential standard seems to have declined to the point where it's make a claim or even just subjectively perceive something as having been intended in a particular way, and you're guilty of wrongthink, and there's no real difference between you and a rapist. You know, I remember walking through conventions, you know, there's all these shelves and these tables and all these people milling around, and I don't think there's a man-jack amongst them who would be physically, let alone emotionally, capable of rape. For one thing, their cock doesn't stick out any further than their belly button, or so I would imagine, looking at them, and they get out of breath unwrapping a Twinkie. So it just doesn't jibe. Alright, I'm being hyperbolic and a bit dismissive, but there's a point for that. It kind of rebalances things from the status quo, which is an accusation must be believed and you're cancelled. And that's it. There is no recourse, particularly in the tabletop gaming industry, which has been through its whole Me Too thing lately, most prominently with Zack Smith, and now with Bill Webb of Frog God Games. So, Bill went to PaizoCon 2 years ago, apparently got a little bit drunk, got in a very slight altercation, and was banned from that particular convention, apparently for that. But the main fuss has centred around him offering a cigarette to a woman, BJ Hensley, who's unfortunately named, but fairly well known in the industry. Now, he had been slightly over-familiar with her, calling her sweetie or something earlier, which, you know, never goes down particularly well with certain people. And then when he offered her a cigarette, his hotel key was in the jacket of his cigarette packet, and this was construed as an invitation to go to his room for a bit of the old in and out, which it wasn't. You know, his wife and kids were at the convention and staying in the same room as him, so, you know, awkward that would have been, but it was construed that way. And off the back of these three things, I guess, Bill Webb has essentially been cancelled. And not just Bill, Frog God Games. Anything they get involved in, anytime they get involved in anything, whether it's a Kickstarter or a collaborative project or whatever, certain usual suspects within the gaming industry crawl out of the woodwork to spread these stories and to embellish them and to big them up and to make them into something else. And then there's anonymous people who've told them other things and blah, blah, blah. But there's no right of reply. There's no legal recourse. You're just kind of stuck with it. Most role-playing game creators, most role-playing game companies don't have the spare assets to take anyone to court for spreading these rumours about them. Until now. See, Frog God Games and Bill Webb, they're involved with Steve Jackson Games and a Kickstarter of theirs. I think it's for a revised version of the Fantasy Trip, to produce something based around their game world for that system. And, of course, once they got involved, the usual suspects came out again and started saying all kinds of horrible things about Bill Webb and, by extension, Frog God Games, interfering in their business relationships and so on. Steve Jackson Games isn't a particularly small company. Steve Jackson Games has quite a lot of money. They're quite a heavy hitter. Now, a lot of that money comes from Munchkin, and I'm not bitter. But I have tangled with them legally over that, trying to get what I felt me and my writing partner were due for all the Munchkin spin-offs. There was provision in our contract that could have seen us get a little bit more money out of them, given the runaway success that the Munchkin card game and spin-offs and everything originating from that original book, Munchkin's Guide to Power Gaming, was. Our lawyer took it as far as they could, but basically said, yeah, they're in Texas, they've got quite a lot of lawyers who are quite good, and basically your odds of succeeding are very low. So he just dropped it. You know, it was worth a shot to try and get at the Munchkin millions. But the point is, I've had a legal entanglement with SJG in the past, and I know what they can be like when it comes to this kind of thing. And they've decided to go after the kind of ringleaders of the online rumour mill as regards Bill Webb. So that will be interesting to see how it unfolds. If it does get to court, if it does become a case, I think they've got a fairly strong one, and I think Steve Jackson Games' legal team and so on are capable enough of seeing that through, if it gets that far. Of course, today, over on Tencast Tavern, look it up on your googly machines, Bill has made a public statement that's available there. Unfortunately, kind of apologising and copping to perhaps maybe have been being inappropriate in some ways, which, as we all know, I'm sure regular viewers of this channel, is a bad move. Don't apologise ever. It's blood in the water, and in this case it could weaken the legal case because it could be construed as an admission of guilt, even though really all he's saying is I'm sorry you were upset, and in a more longer-winded way. But it's interesting, and we'll see how that pans out, and it makes me wonder if other people who have either independent, separate sources of funding that they can use to pay for legal cases, or have worked with bigger companies who can pay for legal cases, whether we're going to start seeing some sort of backlash to this rumour mill. We seem to be in, weirdly, the kind of voice acting community with the whole Kick Vic thing. I think we're starting to see some of this stuff come through in comics and so on. I'm not a huge fan of using the law to crack down on people's free expression. You know, people should be free to spread rumours that they've heard and so on without necessarily being held to account. But in this case, I think there is a demonstration of a meeting of the harm principle in that there is interference in contracts, there is damage to companies, there's damage to people outside the people who are supposed to have done anything. So I think you can argue that it meets that criterion. There is harm being caused to people. And so as such, that's justification for bringing the law in. Anyway, it'll all be interesting to see. We don't even know whether this is going to turn into a legal case yet, but there are others in comics and the voiceover community that could also set some sort of precedent and maybe scare a few people into not Twitter mobbing quite so much, and reintroducing a legal standard of evidence before we cancel someone, and that can only be a good thing. I think we need to redress that balance. Zang.
The Atomic Age, with its A-bombs, transistorized radios, jet engines, and a new breed of dangerous supervillain, requires heroes to face the challenge. That's where you come in. The world needs you, Agent. Agent of Swing.